Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and greetings, my dear sisters and brothers. Welcome to another episode of the Radio Resistance podcast. As always, I'm joined here along with my dear brother and co-host Zubair John. Zubair John, do you want to share with our viewers what our agenda for today is?
Yes, sure. Salam Kamel John, and to our dear viewers, welcome to Ep.03. Today we're going to be discussing the latest interview of the leader of the National Resistance Front, Commander Ahmad Massoud. This interview was with BBC Persian, and it was very well received. Recently, we saw a English subtitled version of this interview, so we decided to provide an analysis and a summary on this interview. And I think we'll just start with some of the key points and key takeaways of this interview. And you can go ahead, Kamaljan, and start with the first point if you'd like.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Before starting that, I just want to say I agree with you. This interview was one full of insight and very informative, not only on the NRF but all of the realities of the critical situation in Afghanistan. And Commander Massoud, Amir Saib Ahmed Massoud, he maintained a remarkable poise in the face of an interviewer who I wouldn't say was hostile or anything of that sort, but who certainly asked some of the most difficult
Of
questions
course.
possible.
Yeah.
And one more remark I'd like to make before we start our summary analysis is in relation to leaders and leadership. True leaders know who they are and what they stand for. They know their values and the rules that they'll abide by, regardless of the circumstances that they face.
Mhm.
Um, they allow their people to understand those values that they're committed to uphold, which lays a foundation for the rules that their people will be expected to adhere to. True leaders both know and communicate these values openly with the people they lead, creating an atmosphere of certainty and trust.
Mhm.
And this specific interview of our beloved leader, His Excellency Ahmad Massoud, was by far, in my opinion, the most exemplary illustration of exactly these leadership traits.
Yeah.
So yeah, we could go ahead and start with uh, our summary analysis. Do you remember what the first question was, Zubair?
Yeah, the first question that the interviewer asked was, has the resistance formed to the
Uh,
level and extent that you expected?
that's right. And Amir Saab Ahmed Massoud responds here that not only did we achieve our initial expectations, but we've
Hmm.
gone above and beyond. And
Right.
then the interviewer asked, how so? And so uh, and specifically in relation to the military achievements and accomplishments of the National Resistance Front in these last 11 months. And it was here that Commander Massoud, um, he defined the military strategy of the NRFs in the at this current stage. What Amir Saib Ahmed Massoud said was that at this stage, we focused our efforts to make both the world and the people of Afghanistan understand that it is possible to stand against tyranny.
Right.
Um, he gave a few examples, very clear cut examples of what these achievements are, starting from a force of 0 soldiers to now having a well organized and well formed military unit consisting of over 3,000 soldiers. But I think that this was by far the most important in relation to achievements and accomplishments that Amir Saib Ahmad Massoud conveyed. This defining of what the military strategy is. The interviewer specifically asked, "Well, what about the recapturing of certain provinces and districts?" And
Yeah.
Amr said would clarify that that's not part of our strategy in this stage. Of course, in the future, but for right now, that's not part of our military strategy.
Right, because there's
Um,
stages, and currently that's not what they're aiming for at the moment.
exactly. And then So then, straight after that, the interviewer posed the question of, well, without foreign aid or support, do you have what you need to continue this fight?
Hmm.
Um, Zubairjan, do you want to summarize what Amr Saib's response was here?
Yeah, yeah. So he goes on to say that without ample resources, right, without foreign aid or support, it's the people's motivation that outweighs and that is stronger than having all these weapons and resources. Because we see that although not a single country is currently supporting this resistance, it's the people's will and it's their motivation that has led them to be successful so far in their fight against the Taliban. And then he also goes on to say that the conflict in Ukraine is currently keeping the world occupied, busy. That the focus is there, and at the same time, foreign countries having spent 20 years in Afghanistan, in the past 20 years of war in Afghanistan, they now believe that maybe war is no longer the solution in Afghanistan. And Amir Saib says that that is their right to think so. And besides, we're not asking them to come fight. We were never in support of foreign troops or invasion. This was true with the NRF currently and with the first resistance when Amir Saib Ahmad Shah Massoud, the national hero of Afghanistan, said basically the same thing that.
Yeah,
Mhm. Go ahead.
yeah. No, sorry, Zubairjan. This is exactly what I meant by maintaining this remarkable poise in the face of these questions. Right? He
Yeah,
didn't express or show any bitterness. Many
right.
would have. Right? Well, hey, the world abandoned us. This was a joint effort to combat transnational terrorism, and well, we've been abandoned, right? But he didn't express or show any bitterness, and yet he said explicitly said that we welcome these messages.
Yeah, yeah.
Or the message.
Not just expressing bitterness, but also he's not like putting blame or like shifting responsibility and saying, "Oh, it's not my fault," it's the world's fault or whatever. And that just I think that shows because most other people would do something like that, right? I think that just shows you his character. And this is something that he says that until the Taliban agree that political dialogue and a political solution is the way forward, we're going to continue to, and we have no choice but to defend our people and our values. Um, and he also goes on to say that our efforts, currently our decision on fighting and moving forward with this resistance isn't based on foreign countries supporting us. He says on August 15th, I made the decision based the decision to stay back with my own people, knowing that no foreign support would come. And I think that's common sense. To him, it was common sense that these foreign countries just spent 20 years here. They're not going to suddenly re enter or even reinvest in this war against the Taliban that they couldn't be successful in the past 20 years. So he says, I knew this, but regardless, I decided to stay back and do what was morally right, help our people who are oppressed, stand up for them, and to fight for them to have the right to a better life. And one key point that he says is that we are in the year 2022, and
Mhm.
the people of Afghanistan, especially the younger generation, they seek a new Afghanistan. Um, Basically, that they're tired of terrorists having influence in this country, you know, causing damage and destruction and killing and oppression in this country. They're tired of having, injustice and just living in war. So I think that him saying that, we're in 2022, I think that's common sense. And that should be common sense for the world that the people of Afghanistan are not some backwards people that are going to accept just such a low bar and live with these type of standards that a terrorist organization is going to rule over us and we're going to accept it. No, we want more, and we need someone that's going to fight for these rights. And the only person doing that, and the only person that has done that so far, is Commander Ahmad Massoud. Um, the follow-up question was that the interviewer asks that, well, Britain announced that they won't support any military resistance against the Taliban, and France and the US said the same thing. Do you feel isolated? And he goes on to say, no. Again, he says, we welcome or we understand their position, but we also believe that Afghanistan doesn't have a military solution. We also see that. And that's something that we've been saying to the Taliban for years. However, he says it's morally unacceptable for the world to completely change their position in just the past 10, 11 months, when, it was okay for them to have fought the Taliban, supposedly for the rights of the people of Afghanistan. For the past 20 years, it was okay for them to prolong this war. But since we're no longer there, right? Since the world says, since we're no longer there, you're not allowed to fight for your rights against the Taliban. He says that this is wrong. You can't tell us that we're wrong in choosing violence, or choosing this path of resistance against the Taliban, whereas you guys did anything necessary in the past 20 years to combat the Taliban. Um,
Yeah.
I think that was, when he said that, I actually never thought of that. That the hypocrisy of, or the audacity of the West to now
Double
come out.
standardness.
Well,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like, how dare you? It's like, how can you tell us that no, violence isn't the way, or a military solution isn't the way? Um, Meanwhile, you guys tried it for 20 years and did so much more, and we're just defending ourselves, and you're gonna
Right.
condemn this.
Right. And I guess this podcast episode isn't the best place for us to have this uh, tangent conversation, but I slightly disagree with what you said earlier about um, those forces who were fighting and countering terrorism in Afghanistan.
Hmm.
Uh, they couldn't. When you said that they couldn't defeat, well, I think that there were a lot of different causes for um, the following uprising of the Taliban, and then, of course, the collapse of the government, former republic, which Ahmad Massoud does address very briefly in this interview, and we'll get to that later. But just on this note of the double standardness and hypocrisy, there's also a U.S. congressman who recently issued a statement calling out the Biden administration for this, whether it be statements like that of Hugo Shorter's in the UK, labeling these resistance groups as a violent opposition, and so on, or they be the lack of support itself. Um, I think this was a very timely statement, and I'd like to read off a part of that statement. So,
Hmm.
Congressman Adam Kinzinger said that reports that the Biden administration is siding with the Taliban over democratic forces fighting for Afghans' freedoms are troublesome and disheartening. Though President Biden may have lost the will to fight for good, there are still those in the country willing to die for the future of their own nation. Just like, well, this
Right.
isn't in the words of Adam Kinzinger, but just like the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan, they're the flag bearers of
Right.
this fight, right? And then he continues to say, last year we saw the Biden administration follow through on a Trump era commitment to hastily withdraw U.S. forces from Afghanistan. The chaos that ensued not only cost the lives of 13 U.S. service members and hundreds of Afghan civilians, but reversed decades of development
Hmm.
across the country. And this is where, and I won't continue with the rest of the statement for now, but this is where, and this is why I say that, uh, there's that slight disagreement between us in terms of um, whether or not, they could have or couldn't have defeated the Taliban. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so moving forward with the interview, so Berjan, do you have it in front of you as far as the
Yeah.
chronological order, what the next question or
Well, there was just
segment
one more
was?
point like
Yes.
that he followed up with that last question, that he says that after he said that it's unacceptable for the world to suddenly have this double standard, right? He also says that anyone who recognizes or supports the Taliban will be complicit in their crimes. Because of what is currently going on, everything that the Taliban is currently committing, all the decisions that they're making, that is causing, you know, so much harm and killing to our people, that anyone that decides to recognize this group, they're complicit. Anyone who supports them or, you know, whitewashes them is complicit. And in the same vein, he also warns that anyone that basically ignores the situation in Afghanistan, in regards to, we have a terrorist state, a terrorist regime running this country, and other terrorists are pledging allegiance to them, such as Al Qaeda. He says, he warns the world of possibly another 9/11, just like his father, Ahmad Massoud, also exactly in the same way warned the world of, uh, if they are not aware of what's going on in Afghanistan, and if they don't help the resistance in, you know, tackling and fighting these terrorist groups, then it won't just affect Afghanistan, but it could affect the West as well. And I think we're seeing history repeat itself, and this was something that he ended that question on. The following question that the interviewer asks was, the Taliban, of these crimes that he
Yeah.
just mentioned, he says that they deny accusations of ongoing crimes, you know, especially in places like Panjshir and Andarab, Balkhab. He says, well, what do you say about that?
Right. Right. And so Amr Sahib Ahmad Massoud introduces a part of our culture and beliefs over here. I think this was very eloquently mentioned.
Mm-hmm,
Um, so this is word for word. He says that one thing is that is prevalent in our religion and culture is the issue of modesty and integrity, both of which are unfortunately non-existent amongst the Taliban. Absolutely no decency in them at all. They commit all these crimes and atrocities, and then they simply deny it. That's
mm-hmm,
what they've been doing all along. In the last 20 years, we've seen the same exact thing. And in these past 11 months, we've seen this exact same thing. Um,
mm-hmm,
uh, people, Amr said mentioned that, you know, the people are witnesses, the world's a witness, the media recorded, their crimes and atrocities are all well known, but nevertheless, all they say was in us. One other point here in bringing up that specific part of his answer in relation to our culture and our religious values and all that, this just shows an alignment of the values that the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan upholds and adheres to, and universal values, right?
mm-hmm,
This integrity, this in Farsi we say haya. It's originally an Arabic word, right? This mm, sense of what would be a good translation for haya? Shame or
shame,
decency,
modesty, decency.
modesty.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So the Taliban lack that. They lack any and
They're
all of the
shameless.
universal values, and they're absolutely shameless. They just simply deny. Yeah. So, and then the interviewer after the segment asks of Amr Saib in relation to whether or not there is a cooperation between the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan and the other resistance groups that are active um, in the country.
Right.
And here it is that we see the same message that we've heard before as well. But we see that what Amr Saib says is that we support every movement that strives for justice in Afghanistan so long as they respect the laws of Afghanistan, they respect the ideals and values of the Afghan people, and they respect international laws. NRF has been, is, and will continue to strive to unify all the voices, energy, and efforts that are being made for freedom of Afghanistan from occupation, the freedom of Afghanistan from oppression,
Mm-hmm,
tyranny, and the current situation. And then one of the biggest of my personal takeaways from this interview was what he followed up with, where he mentions that today, more than ever, the people of Afghanistan are in need of one thing, and that is unity. The NRF, the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan, will never, has never, will never promote any sort of discord or disunity amongst society in Afghanistan.
Hmm.
And then, there were some examples that were brought up. The interviewer asked about that figure called Maulawi Mahdi. Some know him as Mahdi Mujahid. He was a former Taliban. The Taliban appointed him as a commander of some sort for some time until there were disagreements, and then Maulawi Mahdi noticed and saw and announced to his people that uh, none of the commitments that the Taliban made, they didn't adhere to, and so he uh, left the Taliban and started his own rebellion and resistance against the Taliban, and
Where
so
was this?
specifically in the region of Balkhab, the district of Balkhab,
Okay.
and and so so the interviewer asked if whether or not Amr Saib Ahmad Massoud is in touch with Maulawi Mahdi. And Amr Saib responded by saying that no, I am not directly in touch with him. But again, due to his message and aim, which is for the establishment of justice, we do indeed support him and all others who stand and resist for justice and a just government. We've been, in his words, we've been firmly standing with the people of Balkhab during this time, and we support anyone, even if they're reformed Taliban or from other groups, so long as they align themselves with those values, those aforementioned values. Um, not the time right now, but I will just mention that he Amr Saib, and this just goes to show his appreciation for um, poetry, literature, just like that of his fathers as well. He mentioned a very beautiful, or an excerpt from a very beautiful poem of Rumi, um, to illustrate that and to further illustrate that point of being the doors of mercy always being open. So long as you reform yourself, so long as you change and you have this will to establish social justice in Afghanistan, our doors are open.
Hmm.
Um, I think that was a very important point that was made in this interview as well. And then after this question, I think there was a question in relation to the Taliban. Yes, the Taliban contacting officials outside of Afghanistan, and then the interviewer asked from Amr Saib Ahmed Massoud if whether or not he had also been contacted.
Right.
Zobairjan, do you want to tackle this one?
Yeah. So the interviewer asks, have they contacted you as well? And Ahmed Massoud goes on to say, yes, they have in the past 11 months, but even before that, through the High Council of National Reconciliation, we were in contact with the Taliban. He says, unfortunately, the Taliban, they dissolved this council. It's no longer existing. But he hopes that this decision is reversed because they've always told, Ahmed Massoud is saying, we've always told the Taliban that we should learn from the past, that Afghanistan has been hurt from war, that we should find a peaceful solution, and that is our greatest desire. But unfortunately, the Taliban had no desire for that. And ironically, what the Taliban are now saying is that their biggest desire or their biggest dream is for the Pakistani Taliban to make peace with the government of Pakistan. And he said he says that if only they can have this desire for the people of Afghanistan, but instead they're more concerned with uh, their brothers in Pakistan, the Taliban version, the Pakistani version of the Taliban, who at the end of the day are technically they have the same masters, which is Pakistan. He's saying well, why don't you have that desire for us? Like that your biggest dream is to make peace with the people of Afghanistan, but you don't have, you don't show that kind of commitment here. And he's saying that that's unfortunate. That is, I thought that was very, it's a very interesting point that shows you where their priorities are. And then
Absolutely.
the interviewer goes on to ask, they bring up the situation in of the meeting that occurred in Iran comes up, and he says, "Well, what happened there?" If you want to take that one.
Right, right. That was a very crucial and important part of the interview as well. Right. So the biggest part of this was that we received for the first time confirmation that such talks actually did happen in Tehran. There was a Taliban delegation sent, led by, I mean, a Taliban delegation present there, led by the
Amir
so-called
Khan.
foreign minister of theirs, Amir Khan Muttaqi, right?
Yeah.
And what Amir Seb Ahmad Massoud said here was that, in terms of what happened there at in the meeting, uh, was that Mr. Muttaqi suggested that we returned to Afghanistan and that he offered Amir Seb Ahmad Massoud a position within the government, a ministry, and said that you could have your residences back, your house back upon coming to Afghanistan, without any problems at all. So we see here again a complete denial of the realities of Afghanistan, that shamelessness we mentioned earlier, right? And then Amir Saib Ahmed Masood says that our message to Mr. Mutaqi was that our issue is not about one individual. It's not about Ahmad Masood. You don't need to invite me back. How about instead we sit together, deliberate, and decide on the fate of Afghanistan, something that is worth presenting to the people of Afghanistan. And he suggested in this meeting that we work together on building a process. Uh, that the suggestion of this process um, being without such a process, we will not be able to resolve our issues because,
Mhm.
as they argue that Afghanistan is in peace, on that very same day, the Taliban had kidnapped Professor Jalal on what grounds? On the grounds of just simply speaking out against them, right? So on one hand, Amr Seb says that on one hand you're saying that Afghanistan is in peace, and on the other hand, anyone who raises their voice, you simply detain and torture them.
Mhm.
And then the other key point in terms of things that happened there was that Amr Seb Ahmed Masood introduces an example of a process that could work. Right? He says that in this process, for example, step one would be a dialogue between all of the people of Afghanistan, all parties, all groups. That such a meeting should take place in a place that's safe and sound for everybody. And then the next step would be to create a somewhat of an interim government, which would have the support of the people of Afghanistan and the international community,
Mhm.
which would in a way assist with safeguarding a proper transition of power later, right?
Mhm.
And then not just the NRF and their delegation that were present there in the meeting, but also the hosts of the meeting, those who were there from
Iran.
On Iran's behalf, right?
Mhm. Right.
They're all disappointed. They were all
Mhm.
disappointed because they clearly saw the lack of the will and the lack of desire to actually achieve anything. They were just simply demanding a surrender again. Um,
Yeah.
so that's what happened in Tehran. Oh, and one more point I just remembered. I thought this was very funny actually. When Amir Khan Muttaqi suggested to, I'm sorry, bro. This is just too funny. Um, so Amir Saib Ahmad Massoud shared with us. I'm so happy he shared this with us. But he said that an interesting point is that they brought up my opposition to the former president, Mr. Ghani. Mutaki
Mhm.
said to come back to Afghanistan and become a political opponent of mine, as opposed to of ours, as opposed to leading this military opposition, right?
Mhm.
And then very eloquently, Amir said Ahmad Massoud says that what he said was that um, the thing is that Mr. Ghani and I, despite all of our disagreements, there was one very crucial thing which we agreed upon, and that was the Constitution. And moreover, irrespective of whether or not the last elections were fraudulent or rigged, um, that's not something that he wanted to get into in this interview, right? But he said the point is this: that this process called elections is what made him the head of the government, and me, meaning Ahmad Massoud, as the opposition. Uh, he ended that note with saying that he and I both agreed on this, and that only through such a process a government can be formed. How about
Mm.
you come and accept this, the idea of such a process, and if the people choose you as the head of the government or as president via elections, then why not? We'll gladly come to Kabul. We'll be your political opposition, providing constructive criticism so that our country will ultimately reach a better condition. Again, another olive branch, just like the multitude of all these olive branches we saw being extended to the Taliban before their um, attack on Panjshir and after as well.
Right.
Yeah. So moving forward from here, Azerbaijan, I'm gonna need to hear help a bit. What was the next segment we
So
we
after he asks, like, what do you see as the reason for the collapse of the government?
all right, right.
Um, you kind of touched on that, right? Or did you want to, do you have anything more to say about that?
I guess just one final point, a final thing to just note here is that yes, the interviewer posed the question of whether what were, in your opinion, Ahmad Massoud, the causes for the collapse of the former republic,
Yeah,
and that's where Ahmad Massoud said this deserves its own entire discussion. Right now is
correct.
not the time to go into all of those details, but he alluded to two of the most primary reasons, and that those two reasons, one we just mentioned, well, going a little more into it, it's the
Centralization.
centralization of Ghani's power, of the
Mm.
president's former president's power, and then also, of course, the Doha talks and the Doha agreement, and so ultimately um, mentioning the responsibility that the Americans had as well, the
And that
United
was the
States
follow.
government.
Right, right. And that was the follow-up question. He says, "Are the Americans guilty too?" Uh,
Exactly.
and uh, and then Ahmed Massoud answers that. He says, "Without a doubt." He says, "Without a doubt, we consistently raised this issue. We spoke to American officials, their diplomats, Khalilzad, during the Doha talks and after, saying that this is a recipe for disaster. The Taliban didn't agree to any of the agreements, but the U.S. didn't do anything about it. So they paved the way for this. That's why he says that Americans are guilty in this sense, that the withdrawal was at a bad time and a bad situation. It had no conditions to it, and that's also what led to what the current situation is. Um, and then the interviewer asks, he asks who was involved in this conspiracy, and Ahmad Massoud says, I
Uh,
cannot. I Yeah.
well,
Go ahead.
sorry, was that because Ahmed Massoud mentioned that this was a conspiracy, or is it the
Oh yeah,
interviewer
yeah.
who posed it?
I believe it's because he mentions that this is a conspiracy, but or it was the way he posed the question, who just as if he assumes that this was a conspiracy based off of what played
Yeah,
out.
yeah. I think Amr Seb Ahmed Massoud mentioned that hopefully there are other investigations happening, but that the NRF is also um, has their own has started their own
Hmm.
initiative of fully investigating exactly what went down and what all of the causes were. But again,
That's
he
right.
said
That's
there's a
exactly what he
discussion for
says.
another time. Yeah.
Yep, yep. He says one day it will come out, and we're also working on it. But then he says, for sure, that he says what we see are former politicians and government officials coming back, and they're changing their stance on the Taliban. He says they're whitewashing them now, or they're legitimizing them now, but previously they were condemning them. He says this change in tone is, we see it's a double standard. It's hypocrisy. These are double standards. That just 10 months ago, during the last 20 years, you know, condemning them in the most harshest tones and in the harshest way, saying that these are people that are these are terrorists that have to be brought to justice and whatnot. But now, when the opportunity arises, they're saying, oh, these are our brothers, and we need to unite with them, and we need to accept them as our leaders and whatnot, without holding them accountable for anything. This is It's opportunism. That's what it is. These are opportunists that have no principles. Um, but yeah,
Shows the
the
wisdom
follow.
of our leader there, you know.
Yeah, exactly. It's the second question says he says, did you get the message on the day of the collapse or days prior in regards to the fall of Kabul? Ahmed Massoud goes on to say that, well, we were witnessing the situation and it was getting worse day by day. But on the day of the collapse, we received a message that Kabul is falling. So we had a meeting with colleagues, elders, and friends that, what should we do? What is the decision to be made? And basically, there were three choices. Number one is we either flee like everyone else, or number two is we join the Taliban, or number three is we decide to stay back and stand with our people and resist. And obviously, number three was chosen. We saw Ahmed Massoud on August 15th he went to Panjshir, and the resistance basically uh, took place from there.
That was funny,
Um,
yes.
yeah, so the following question, I'll just introduce it to you, and you can take this one, was if you can sum up in short, what
Oh,
direction is Afghanistan heading towards? This is what he asks Amir Saib to basically end the interview.
yeah, and I think uh, it was very beautiful to see the compassion from our leader here um, at the very end of the interview. Um, I'll just go ahead and read this part because I think I can never do as good great of a job as Amir Sab Ahmad Massoud. And but yeah, so he said, recently I read an article on a website regarding our Sikh brothers, and one of them specifically had said that there's no more hope in Afghanistan and we must leave. And Amir Saib Ahmed Massoud mentioned how immensely he was hurt uh, by reading this article. He
Mm,
said he asked this question, a rhetorical question of why should there be no hope?
right.
The ultimate purpose of our resistance is to create hope for our people. And he mentions that, as always, a person must remain hopeful. He conveyed to us that he's an optimist himself and a hopeful person, and hopefully we can see a peaceful Afghanistan soon. Um, yeah, that was a very heartwarming um, part of the interview. Yeah, so I think that covers everything as far as the key points or major takeaways. But before we conclude or end here, Zobar, I would like to share mine, but before I do, I'd like to ask you what was one of the biggest things you walked away with after listening to and watching this interview?
Yeah, well, I would say, just like right off the bat, when you listen to Commander Ahmed Massoud, he's real. That's the first thing. It's just he's genuine, and
Oh
in
yeah,
regards, especially in comparison to the leaders of the world, for sure, he's genuine. He's humble. He's honest. He keeps it real. And but in the context of Afghanistan, the current situation where the country is, in the hands of a terrorist organization, we see nobody else saying anything against these people. And in regards to what the actual government of the Taliban or this Islamic Emirate supposedly, right? What they're saying is everything that they say is nonsense, right? It's just denial, like Ahmed Massoud said, no shame. It's just denial. They don't take responsibility for anything that is currently happening. So it's illogical. You're just talking to a bunch of irrational, illogical people. And then there's no other opposition. There's no other. All those politicians and all those former government officials, they just fled and they're no longer in the scene. Nobody's
Right.
doing anything except Ahmad Massoud. So that's what I take away is just listening to his words, the way he has an answer for every question, like a legitimate answer to every question. And it gives me hope that, like, okay, this is someone I could stand behind. This is a resistance that makes sense, that they have an answer for everything, they have a plan for everything. They're currently succeeding. We see the Taliban taking heavy losses. We see the resistance just standing for all the right things. So that's what stands out to me in an overall sense, that this person is someone that is our only shot, is our only hope, and we should support.
I
What
could
about
not
you?
have said that any better myself, Zubair John, and I kind of don't even want to share my
No, no, well, that was just like a
experience.
general thought. That
No,
was just like a general
it
summary, but
was beautiful,
specifically, maybe what
beautifully
stood out
said.
to you in the
Yeah, no,
interview?
one of the main things that I walked away with was Ahmad Massoud and the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan's resolve to stand against oppression and establish a government based on the will of the people. This has
Yeah,
been his
yeah,
message over and over. We've seen it in previous interviews as well. But the
yeah,
fact that he specifically in this interview, I don't want to say is indifferent to um, global and international support, but that such a resolve, that resolve you see, like with or without, we're
correct,
doing what's our responsibility, what's our right, we're fighting for it,
right.
whether or not anyone else wants to help us. And yeah, that was the biggest thing I walked away
I
with.
agree. That theme stands out. And it was like reiterated. It was just constant. All the answers, that was kind of something that you would see. It's like with or without, we're gonna continue. We're not depending necessarily on the world. We're gonna continue because we're doing what's right.
Right. One more, one final thing. I am not exactly sure if we did cover this earlier as well. It was just that in relation to the violent opposition, some
Hmm.
throwing around this label, right? Again, this has always been addressed, but just to clarify for our viewers here, again, violence has never been a part of the NRF's platform, if you will. It's
Right,
always been forced upon the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan. The National
right,
Resistance, that's another key takeaway, right? I think in what Ahmed Massoud said was that our position has always been one for peace, and it is our belief that the solution for Afghanistan is a political one and has to be based on reconciliation and negotiations.
correct.
So that was another very important repeated theme
Theme.
across
Yep, yep.
this interview.
100%.
Yeah. All
100%.
right. So, Berjan, I think that's a wrap.
Yep.
Any closing remarks on your end?
No, that's it. I don't think we should go on with we covered everything, so we don't want to take up more time. I would just say that if we should remember to, if we can like and subscribe and share and all that. um, what
Yeah,
do you got to say?
that's all. Thank you very much to everyone who watched, to all of our viewers, all of our subscribers, and yes, please do hit the like button, hit the subscribe if you haven't already, and please help us. The biggest help would be just sharing our channel, sharing the podcast with others who you think may be interested in such discussions. Again, thank you, and stay tuned.